there's bad news and there's good news for Shedeur. The bad news is that the owner, I believe, despite what the owner said, Jim Haslam, I believe he drafted Shedeur.
Yeah.
All right. It doesn't make sense for the Browns to draft two quarterbacks that they realize both of them are projects, right? Draft two quarterbacks. Now they got to keep four. All right. So I don't think Stefanski and Andrew Berry, the GM, and I don't think they really like having Shedeur around. I'm not saying they don't like him as a person, but I think they feel maybe a I'm just reading what I'm seeing.
What you're saying
I feel like there's a little resentment there because it's like now we got to develop this guy to some degree, and it becomes a circus because of who he is and his last name. So I think that's the bad news for Mike. I'm seeing for Shedeur. The good news for Shedeur is that the owner drafted him. Because the owner is like, I want to see what this guy can do, all right? And we know they're going to start Joe Flacco. They're going to lose a lot of games early. And then they'll probably go to Dillon Gabriel first, I guess,
yes.
Right? He'll go first. And unless he's electric.
Week 1 in the NFL is supposed to be about fresh starts and new hope. But for the Cleveland Browns, their season opener against the Bengals raised more questions than answers. Joe Flacco, the veteran they trusted under center, looked every bit like a quarterback at the end of his rope. Dillon Gabriel sat as the backup, ready to step in. Kenny Pickett lingered in the shadows, a trade piece with little long-term value. And Shedeur Sanders? Nowhere to be found. He wasn't injured. He wasn't unavailable. He was simply inactive. And that's the real story. Shedeur Sanders, the rookie who had an entire fan base buzzing, the rookie whose every move has been scrutinized since draft day, was healthy but benched. He stood on the sideline, helmet off, as Cleveland's offense sputtered, stalled, and fell flat against Cincinnati. Which brings us to the question nobody in Cleveland wants to answer. Did the Browns bench Shedeur because he isn't ready, or because they never wanted him to begin with? When your name is Sanders and your jersey says Browns, you're playing in more than a football game. You're playing in a political battle. Months ago, Nick Wright, Chris Broussard, and Kevin Wildes dissected Cleveland's handling of Shedeur in the preseason. They called it strange. They called it mishandled. They even hinted that it bordered on sabotage. Shedeur was pulled from a late-game drive for Tyler Huntley, a quarterback who was cut shortly after. He was rarely given quality reps with the starters. And when he struggled behind a third-string offensive line, the narrative became, see, he's not ready. Fast forward to this Bengals game and tell me it doesn't feel the same. The Browns keep him buried. Not because the roster demands it, but because the coaching staff never embraced him in the first place. Chris Broussard made it plain. He said Shedeur should have gotten more chances to work with the first and second units in camp. He should have been trusted to run the 2-minute drill in preseason. But instead, Kevin Stefanski handed those reps to others. Because Broussard believes there's resentment inside that building. Resentment that Shedeur wasn't Stefanski's pick. Resentment that Jimmy Haslam, the owner, forced him into the quarterback room. And resentment that his last name brings media attention and fan expectations that most rookies never face. That's the backdrop. That's the storm Shedeur walked into. And that's why this Bengals game felt less like a football contest and more like a statement. When coaches see you as an obligation instead of an opportunity, your battle is uphill before the ball is even snapped. So here's the question for you. Do you think Cleveland's decision to bench Shedeur against the Bengals was about protecting him or about burying him? Drop your answer in the comments.
There's been a lot of nonsense said about the league as a whole having, they sent the code red to not draft him, and now that Kevin Stefanski is actively calling the bad plays for Shedeur, which I think is an opinion held by dumb people. So here are the things I believe to be true. I wrote them down in a list like Bruce sometimes. Number 1, there was not a league-wide anti-Shedeur conspiracy. I think that's ridiculous. Number 2, I do think he has more talent than Dillon Gabriel, but I don't think for the job they're trying to win, which is backup quarterback, raw talent is the deciding factor. I think readiness is, and it does appear right now Gabriel is more ready. Even though he had practiced poorly, he played better in the preseason than Shedeur did. Number 3, I don't think Stefanski ever wanted him.
Nick Wright pushed back on the idea of a league-wide conspiracy against Shedeur, but he didn't hesitate to point the finger at Cleveland's staff. He said it outright: Stefanski never wanted him. The plan was to groom Dillon Gabriel. Stefanski expected to spend his energy shaping Gabriel into a reliable backup. Then Haslam stepped in, drafted Shedeur, and suddenly the coach had to split time, deal with media noise, and answer uncomfortable questions. That kind of resentment doesn't stay hidden. It shows up in decisions. It shows up in reps. It shows up in who gets the benefit of the doubt and who doesn't. Gabriel threw one solid preseason game, and suddenly he leapfrogged Shedeur on the depth chart. Meanwhile, Shedeur never got a chance to finish drives, never got time with starters, and got saddled with numbers that screamed unready. Let's remember, he took 5 sacks in a preseason outing, losing 41 yards. That stat is branded onto his name now. And while some will argue it was his fault, others know the truth: that was the product of being thrown behind an offensive line full of fringe players. The NFL doesn't care about explanations, it only cares about the box score. And that's the reality Shedeur is fighting. He doesn't just have to outperform his peers. He has to erase bad optics. He has to convince a coaching staff that already resented his presence. And he has to do it all while the national media watches every snap. So let me ask you this: do you think Shedeur's supporters, the fans and media constantly demanding his promotion, are actually helping him, or are they making his situation worse by turning him into a distraction? Here's where the Bengals game puts everything under a microscope. Joe Flacco couldn't move. He stood in the pocket like a statue, absorbing hits and throwing checkdowns. The offense sputtered. The Bengals feasted. And yet, even in that disaster, Stefanski never gave Shedeur a helmet. He let the rookie stand by while the franchise's season opener became a showcase of stale, predictable football. It makes you wonder, if Shedeur had been active, would things have been different? Could his mobility have created plays Flacco couldn't? Or was the plan always to keep him invisible until ownership forces otherwise? Sometimes the boldest benching says more than a start ever could. Let's zoom out to the bigger picture. The Browns are carrying 4 quarterbacks. 5. Gabriel, Pickett, Shedeur. Broussard was blunt. That makes no sense. NFL teams rarely keep 4. Someone is always the odd man out. And right now, that odd man is Shedeur Sanders. Nick Wright added the harshest truth of all: there isn't a single team in the NFL where Shedeur would start right now. And maybe only a couple where he'd even be a clear number 2. That's the grind of being a late-round rookie. You're not seen as the answer, you're seen as a lottery ticket. But here's the twist: when you're drafted by the owner, you're not just a lottery ticket. You're leverage. You're a symbol. You're a statement that Jimmy Haslam wanted his guy, whether his coach agreed or not. And that's where the real battle lies. When ownership and coaching clash, players become pawns. So here's my question to you. If you were Shedeur Sanders, would you want to stay in Cleveland and fight for a chance? Or would you hope for a trade to a team that actually believes in you? And now we get to the harsh, unfair reality. Every rookie drafted late faces a razor-thin margin for error. One muffed punt, one blown assignment, one ugly game, and your career path can shift forever. That's not paranoia. That's the league. That's how it works. Shedeur Sanders lived that reality in preseason. And week 1 against the Bengals made it even clearer. He isn't being protected. He isn't being developed. He's being sidelined. He's being hidden. He's being benched, not because he can't play, but because Cleveland doesn't want the spotlight that comes with him. And yet, the spotlight never leaves. Because here's what I believe, and here's what Nick Wright hinted at. Jimmy Haslam won't let this continue. Flacco will lose games. Gabriel will show his inexperience. Pickett will stay irrelevant. And when the season spirals, Haslam will step in. And when that moment comes, Shedeur Sanders will get his shot. You can stall the debut, but you can't silence the demand forever. So here's where we stand after week 1. The Browns lost to the Bengals. The offense looked lifeless. The quarterback room looked overcrowded. And Shedeur Sanders, the rookie with the most upside, stood on the sideline with no helmet. Not because he couldn't play, but because he wasn't wanted by the men making the decisions. That is the real truth behind his benching. Not readiness, not protection, politics, resentment, and an organization that can't seem to decide whether it wants to win games or win power struggles. And I'll leave you with this. The Browns may think they can bury Shedeur Sanders, but history shows us something different. Talented quarterbacks, especially those with powerful backing and undeniable skill, eventually find the field. And when they do, everything changes. So ask yourself, when that moment comes, will the Browns regret keeping him sidelined for so long? Or will they thank themselves for waiting until the storm was too big to ignore? Because one way or another, the Shedeur Sanders era is coming. That's the breakdown from Whistle Storm. Do you believe the Browns benched Shedeur Sanders to protect him, or do you think they've been sabotaging him from the start? Drop your thoughts below. And if you want more raw, dramatic NFL stories like this, controversies, QB battles, and the truth the league won't say out loud, hit like, tap subscribe, and stay locked in with us here at Whistle Storm. Because trust me, the Shedeur Sanders story is far from over.